listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. To hear the full show each day, tune in to AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN or log in to accesswdun.com and click the Listen Live button from 9 to 11 Monday through Friday. Joining me right now is John Ashbrook. He is from the Ruthless podcast. We love getting together with John. And, of course, the new episode today for Ruthless is out. And I only got to listen to a few minutes of it, John, because I did, for part of my drive today, have 4 grandchildren in the car with me that were not of the appropriate age to listen to you all. So I only got to the beginning of the program, but we'll get it together.
Well, thanks for listening, Martha. It's great to be back on with you as always.
So that was Doug Burgum, who is like my favorite. You know, I think, well, I'll set that aside by saying I think that he should pick Nikki Haley, but he's not going to do that. I think that in the past, putting 1 and 2 together has been a pretty good winning combination, and we should do that. I don't think he's going to do that, but I would love for him to pick somebody like Doug Burgum because he just knows how to get the work done.
Yeah, Burgum is great. And, you know, I really love the guy because he comes from North Dakota, which is a state made up of a bunch of small towns. And he built a business that made it big and was bought by a giant tech company. And what he told the buyer was that he wanted to keep his workforce in North Dakota because that's where he had the great culture of people who really wanted that sort of work, and they weren't going to get it otherwise. And I just love the commitment that he has to people that have meant so much to him through the years. So I'm with you. I think J.D. Vance has a pretty good shot. You know, obviously, President Trump's family loves the guy. I'm a fan of his as well. He's from Ohio. I'm from Ohio. He's from actually a neighboring town from where I grew up. And, you know, there's a lot of buzz about Marco Rubio as well, maybe moving from Florida to avoid that 12th Amendment problem. But a lot of buzz on Rubio as a potential running mate as well.
Yeah, and what concerns me about Rubio, and I have this theory about missing your moment in time, you know, where Howard Baker back in the day, his moment in time was right after Watergate, but he waited, and so we never had a President Baker. Rubio has sort of been in, been out, presidential politics. It's not that he's too old. I just think, because obviously nobody's too old, right, because of who we have running. But it's almost like he's kind of missed his moment.
Well, he certainly would disagree with that because you can just see everything that he's doing in D.C. and out seems to be geared toward how do I make myself the right guy for this job. And, you know, he's obviously close with a number of top Trump campaign brass. And he has a chance to really bring home some vote in the Hispanic community that is sort of headed in the Republican direction anyway for cultural reasons and economic reasons and everything else. And so you could see Trump maybe taking him. You know, there's also still chatter out there about Tom Cotton, senator from Arkansas, maybe Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State, maybe Tim Scott. So, you know, Trump has really handled this VP selection process with just classic Trump apprentice-style fashion. And I've loved watching every second of it. And I guess we'll probably know here just in a few short weeks.
Well, and we know how important it's going to be, you know, who this pick is, because they'll immediately be the front runner for 28. And, you know, Trump won't be running again. And, you know, I think it'll be really, really important who he picks, much more important than it usually is. Now, a couple hours ago, you posted she's running in a post about Hillary Clinton. So, I mean, you know, because just like Stacey Abrams, she hasn't accepted her election results. So, you know, I guess we just like election deniers. I don't know.
Well, you know, who knows? Democrats, let's say Joe Biden falls over and splits his pants on Thursday night. I mean, Democrats might be looking for somebody else. And, you know, is Hillary Clinton among those candidates they'd considered it to replace Biden with? I don't know. I mean, time will tell. But she just always emerges at this time when it seems like it benefits her the most.
Yeah, at the Tonys. Did you see that? She was at the Tonys.
I did.
Which is crazy. Yeah. It just ruins it for me, because I do love my musical theater. Okay, I'll admit it, and it makes it difficult. Listen, we're going to talk about the debate, but first I want to bring in a big fan of the show, Representative Will Wade of the 9th District on the State House of Georgia, and he has just been dying to talk to you, so I gave him the opportunity this morning. Hey, Will.
Good morning, Martha, and good morning, one of the best Gen X commentators that I've ever heard. So I'm glad to get you just a moment to say hello. And I had the opportunity recently to be a part of a charity golf tournament in which each of the members of our team, 2 of which were veterans, were donning a Ruthless hat that I purchased from you guys, and they just thought it was awesome. And we actually listened to part of your podcast on the golf course because there were no grandchildren or my children weren't around. So it was a fun time had by all. But no, seriously, you guys are doing a phenomenal job, and I love your insight. And you guys actually helped me every Tuesday and Thursday during the session from January to the end of March survive my hour and 20-minute commute to the Capitol. So thank you for that as well.
Yeah, well, it's great to meet you, and I really appreciate you listening to the show. It's a lot of fun doing this show a couple times a week, and we really are buddies behind the scenes and would choose to hang out with each other even if we weren't on the mics. And so it's kind of wild that just sitting around talking with your buddies is something that people are listening to, and but we are very, very grateful that you're tuning in, Will. Thank you.
My pleasure. And, I definitely enjoy your thoughts, obviously, on the national scene, but also just curious to get your thoughts. One of the things I'm really focused on, obviously, in the state of Georgia, we have a balanced budget. We ensure that, I'm one of Governor Kemp's floor leaders. We're really focused on the well done instead of the well said. And I just think that right now all that you're seeing out of D.C. is a few folks that are focused more on talking and less doing. And do you think if we can see a change in November that we're going to get back to some sense of folks that want to tackle, these little issues like, the fiscal cliff of 2034 that's headed quickly approaching, the border, all of the things that you guys spend a lot of time talking about. I think Gen Xers, nobody talks about us because we're out here busy doing things, raising a family, working. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think you're right. I think that if this election is an election about it's a workhorse versus a very old and doddering show horse. I think the election will have an impact on something that actually gets done. Trump's elected. He's actually going to work to shut down the border. He's actually going to work to send the terrorists out who Biden let in. I really think that on the economy, he is going to turn things around because he's got. We all know about his tax cuts that are up for consideration in 2025, and he is going to push for tax policy that helps our economy grow. And he is going to work with his allies in Congress to work on spending policy that doesn't continue to pile up our national debt. Year in and year out. So I think it's absolutely an opportunity for people to vote just to get things done. And, what's interesting, Will, you guys are in Georgia, and I know we're going to talk about the debate here, but you really can't talk about the debate without making a note of its location. There is... Yep. It's just not a stretch to predict that the location of the first major battle in this election is going to be the site of the last one as well. And Georgia, it's impossible to reach 270 without it, and it's really become the crossroads of American politics in a lot of ways.
Well, Wade, thank you so much for calling in today, and we'll get together soon with some of our Ruthless hats. And John, you're nice enough to give me a hat for my husband that's the Titleist hat, and he says it works really good because it absorbs when he's on the golf course, and with the 95-degree weather, that has been very, very important.
So that's so great to hear, Martha. I mean, it's been hot here in Virginia too. We got a lot of those hats left. So if you want them, just log on to the Merge Shop.
That's right. Now the debate. You mentioned the debate, and of course we can't, we can't gloss over the fact it's in Atlanta. The fact also that the VP has been to Atlanta like 3 times in the last month. That's important to have Georgia, and I think it's an apathy problem. Is that they think that a lot of people are going to stay home, and this debate's important. But my friend Steve Moore said he wants Biden to do well on Thursday because he doesn't want them to replace him.
Well, there's danger of that. I mean, there's. It's not really a conspiracy theory to think that Democrats wanted the early debate as a demonstration ahead of the convention, because if Biden fails, they can start the process to replace him in August. And, everybody's sort of wondering how can they actually go to November with a guy who can't talk. And I think you're right. The expectations could not be lower. So it's not like Biden has to do much to exceed what people are, sort of predicting that they're going to get out of him. But he's shown that he can. You guys remember the State of the Union from just a few months ago when they pumped him full of something and all of a sudden he had all this energy. They're probably going to do that again. And he really doesn't have to do very much to exceed expectations.
And I want to ask you one more question about immigration, and it is the number one issue. People are talking about it everywhere. We played this clip earlier in the program where there was supposed to be a panel of average voters. It was on CNN, and the host was correcting the voter on what they thought, which is really a bad sign, I think, for the liberal side, because they don't, it's this whole attitude of you just don't understand how good things are, But we had an immigration bill that was passed by the House about 15 months ago, H.R. 2, which was basically took all the Trump executive orders and codified them into law, which is theoretically what they're supposed to do when a bunch of executive orders get bounced back and forth, right? So they did that. They sent over the Senate. Nothing's happened. Then the Senate gets involved in this ridiculous compromise bill. And sometime I want to ask James Langford about how he got involved in that, because he's a good guy, but he got involved in this project. So time has passed, but they haven't put it through committee. They just say it's dead on arrival. In the old days, am I so old that you might take some parts of that bill, some parts of the H.R. 2, put it together, send it back and forth a couple of times, but nobody wants to do that anymore. They just want to go to podiums and say it's dead on arrival.
No, that's exactly right. And it's not that old a days, Martha. I remember in the mid-2000s when Democrats were saying that the border was a problem and we needed to get immigration under control. And Obama said that the border was a problem and we need to get immigration under control. And back to Will's point about people talking versus people actually doing, I think that's the reason why this election is so important, because we can't wait another minute. We have to shut the border down now. I mean, there's just no way around it. And you need leadership in order to execute on that. And you need the kind of leadership that comes with a Republican majority in the House, a Republican majority in the Senate, and the White House. And if we don't have all three of those things, Democrats are going to stop anything that the president does.
And we got to.
And by the way, you mentioned CNN, Martha.
Yes.
I have just beyond had it with them talking down to people, telling people that what you think you see is not true. Don't believe your lying eyes. And I really hope at this debate that they keep their questions short. They always think that they're the stars of politics, and we all know they're not. Nobody is electing them to anything. And so I hope they can, we got like 80 minutes to listen to the candidates. I hope that they just sort of ask a quick question that of an issue that matters and just let the candidates go.
John Ashbrook, thank you so much for being with us today. You can listen to Ruthless Tuesdays and Thursdays. And you guys aren't coming to Atlanta, are you? You should have.
We would love to, and we have, maybe in the near future.
So you've got a lot of plans. You've got vacations where you're just parenting in a different location. I did get that far in the podcast. I sent that to my kids after I heard that. So I've got all the grandkids this week, and or all the ones that are potty trained. That's what we do. But I got all of them, and we're doing all the fun stuff. So it's great. Anyway, thanks for being with me today, John.
Great talking to you, Martha. Thanks for having me.
It's where North Georgia comes to talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Joining me right now is Demian Brady, who is the Vice President for Research for the National Taxpayers Union Foundation. And we appreciate you being with us today. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
So give us kind of a lay of the land of what to expect in kind of two universes related to taxes, where we are right now and what to expect if Trump is reelected and if we win back the House and the Senate, and then what to expect if Joe Biden gets his way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're at a fiscal crossroads on tax policy, and a lot is going to depend on the outcome of the elections. And the big thing on the agenda for next year after the election is what to do with the tax cuts that were enacted in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed by President Trump and the House and the Senate back at the time. This included a lot of breaks for individuals and businesses, and unfortunately, as the pandemic hit, because just before that we were seeing wages were going up across the country. Middle income earners, low income earners, high income earners, across the board, people were earning more, working a lot more. The productivity was up, and the economy was growing. But then the pandemic hit, and that kind of up. But now we're left with a situation where we're facing consumers across the country are dealing with a lot of burdens from resulting a lot because of all the overspending from here in Washington. So now we got to figure out what to do with these tax cuts. Biden would want to impose higher taxes on a lot of wealthier earners, but then some people might be surprised to find that they might not think that they're wealthy, but when Washington comes looking at them for tax revenues, they'll get included in that, and they could face higher taxes. Well, Republicans are looking for ways to fully extend the tax cuts that were passed and preserve the pro-growth policies that were in there, especially the business expensing and the corporate rate, and just the good breaks that made it a lot easier for individuals to file. You don't have to. The standard deduction was raised, and that will disappear if this expires, and then that made it reduced a lot of the filing burdens on ordinary Americans.
Well, and I think, too, that when you look at tax revenues, and you can look at it every time, whether it was the 1960 tax cut, 1980, 2000, 2017, revenues have gone up. There was a little anomaly because of COVID, right, where you didn't see the revenues go up for that year. But every other year, the revenues have gone up. We've got record amounts of revenue coming in at this point in time from the tax code that we have. The problem is we're still spending like there's COVID out there. The $2 trillion that we added because of COVID is still in the budget. And it's because, and I know your taxpayers union, you don't get involved in the budget stuff as much, but what frustrates me is that we don't really do any oversight on the budget. We just keep adding on or staying the same, regardless of what it is. And you can't run a company this way.
I totally agree. Yeah, we work on a lot of budget reform issues and raising concerns about the debt. So, no matter what the tax rates are, in general, the revenues have averaged around 17 or 18% of GDP. It hovers around that range. But, unfortunately, we're spending right now about 24% of GDP. So there's this large fiscal gap that's growing every year. We need sensible, fair, pro-growth tax policies, but we also need to put the reins on the spending. preserve. So we're not just kicking the can down the road. What's going on now? We're just piling on to the federal debt, and that's just kicking the can down to our kids and our grandkids. We're going to be stuck with this bill and have lower productive economy and higher tax rates and less opportunity. So we got to, the sooner you work to fix that and stabilize the debt and then start reducing it, the cost of doing that will be so much easier.
So what are you all advising folks? And tell us what the National Taxpayers Union Foundation does.
Sure. We are the research arm for the National Taxpayers Union. I work on a lot of budget reforms and tax reforms. We're working on a big project right now about IRS reform. We put together a project called Taxpayers First, which stands for Taxpayers for IRS Transformation. We want to make sure that taxpayer rights are front and center in everything that the IRS does, and that they're treating taxpayers fairly, and that they're using their resources wisely. They were just given a huge chunk of money in the Inflation Reduction Act, and lots of concerns about how they're using that money, and they're shortchanging a lot of major projects. They're focusing on audits and claiming that a lot of people aren't paying what they owe, but then when they do their audits of some of these high-income earners, they come out with a very high no-change rate, which means that in general these people are in compliance with the law. So that means they're going to turn their sights on enforcement activities towards middle-income earners, and we've seen that happening already. And so what we're saying is a better policy for the IRS to pursue is use some of that enforcement money for modernization instead, because they're still operating on computer technology for their core database that dates back to the early 1960s. And they've been struggling for decades and decades to try to get it into the 21st century. And now we're already a quarter way into the 21st century, and they're still lagging far behind. So they could be doing a lot better with the resources that they have.
Well, I mean, and we don't actually, I mean, we have a process in Georgia where we look at a department a year. You don't try to do the entire budget every time, but we don't even make an effort in the federal government. It's just, I mean, it's really a joke. And it doesn't matter if Democrats or Republicans are in control. And I'm a lifelong or an adult long Republican. I voted Democrat a little bit in my 20s because there weren't any Republicans in Georgia back then. But I always felt uncomfortable about it. I never really liked the policies. But what frustrates me is that we've had a couple of instances in the recent past where Republicans have been in control, and they were just as bad at the spending as the Democrats were.
Unfortunately, yeah. There's just you get into office, and then you're playing around with other people's money. So I mean, there are some really good members of Congress, but there's just still not enough consensus across the Republican Party and the Democrat Party to work on these fiscal issues.
You hit the nail on the head, because I was a buyer for 10 years before I stayed home with my children for about 8 years, and then I got into media. And I had done media in the past, but my main job in my 20s was a buyer. And so I got to spend other people's money for a living, and it was fun. Okay, I'll admit that. It is fun spending money you don't have to account for. But the truth is, if you're an elected member of Congress, you should have to account for it. You should be held accountable for it, and we don't do that enough. So I think there's a three-prong solution here. We got to have better tax policy. We got to have better spending policy, and that we got to understand we get the government we vote for. So we got to get out there and vote.
I agree wholeheartedly with you. That's a good platform.
If people know more want to know more about the National Taxpayers Union Foundation, how can they do that?
You can check out our website at ntu.org.
Thanks for being with me today, Demian Brady.
Thank you very much. It's local radio, and that's why you're listening. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Michael Levine is joining me right now, and we get together with him. It's been a while because we've had primaries, but we try to get together with him every other week and talk about these things from a kind of PR perspective. And your thoughts on this debate? It's going to be in Atlanta. It's going to be, Biden and Trump, and it's got these crazy rules, but Trump said anytime, anywhere, and he's following through.
Well, it will be an unprecedented experience because of the rules. And in the end, I think it will be not about who makes better points, but how you feel, how the viewer feels about the experience of each candidate. You know, Roger Ailes had a great and fascinating technique, actually a pioneering technique about debate watching. And his trick was to watch the debate with sound and then watch the debate without sound. And he felt that watching the debate without sound offered him an experience of perception that was different and maybe more telling. So that may be a clue. What Donald Trump says and what Joe Biden says are important, but not nearly as important as how the perception of the experience is for the viewer. And I think that particular proposition favors Donald Trump, because if you compare the two men side by side in terms of vitality, in terms of what appears to be a greater sense of capacity to handle the vast problems that the world and the country is in currently, I think there is an override to President Trump because of Joe Biden's age, no matter what they shoot him up with prior to the debate. You may recall during the State of the Union address, Joe Biden came out like a 15-year-old on 5 energy drinks. And whatever he was injected with to allow him to do that for an hour or so is somewhat of a miracle formula that I think some people said should be drug tested before and after the event.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing, because even though the bar is very low on Joe Biden, I don't think anybody expects him to do well. So if he just gets up there and gets through it, people think he had a good debate. Because I don't like...
and I think the doctors can... evidently, based on the State of the Union, they can inject him with a steroid of some type, a hypersteroid, that will allow him to do that.
But what's so crazy is I thought energetic Joe was kind of scary. I mean, it was. I was very surprised that people said they liked it, because he seemed. I mean, it was not somebody I want to see, but that's just me. Yeah. No, I think maybe the scary came from the obviousness of the difference. I mean, if you asked 100 Americans, was Joe who watched that debate, was that Joe Biden on or off drugs? 100 out of 100 would say drugs, and about 80 out of 100 would say, "Give me some." I mean, it was clearly someone who we had, was transformed medically for about an hour or so. And I think we're going to have the same experience. And you're right, it was a little Frankensteinish in certain ways. Well, and President Trump is coming off of a sort of cycle where he was in trial for about 6 weeks, and he was very controlled in what he could say. Came out twice a day, stayed on topic. Polls were going up. Even right after the conviction, because he was pretty controlled. And he'll be controlled in this debate because they're going to mute his mic, or maybe they won't mute his mic because they want him to interrupt Biden. But I think it's interesting that it's been a little bit rocky over the last couple of weeks with polls moving around quite a bit. And I just don't know what they mean. And I don't know how important this debate is.
Let me offer a couple of thoughts for you to consider and for your listeners to consider. I believe, and I think facts will bear me out over time, that Donald Trump underpolls. And what that means is that if you went and asked 100 Americans in your hometown of Georgia, do you spank your children? Did you spank your children when they were young? 100 out of 100 would raise their hand and say, no, I never spanked my children. Well, of course, we know that about 50% of those people are lying. They're just not telling the truth. Of course they spanked their children. Now, they didn't beat their children, they spanked them. So that has become a societal question, maybe because of Oprah Winfrey or who knows what, that you simply can't answer or don't feel you can answer accurately in polite company. Okay? Despite what you really do at home. Now, I think there's some part of that to Donald Trump's polling. If you ask people, are you going to vote for Donald Trump? They may well say no publicly. But when they get in that booth, there is going to be, I think, proven an underpolling. And this happened also, as you recall, with Hillary Clinton in that race. So if the polls say, the most accurate polls say that Donald Trump's up by 1 point or 2 points, whatever that might be, and that's within the margin of error, it more likely is 4 or 5 points. There's about 2 or 3 points that are underpolled. So that's one thought. The second is Ronald Reagan in 1979 really instructed us in all we need to know about referendum on presidential politics. When he looked into the camera and slowly said, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Are you more free? Are you happier? Is your gas prices less? Are your food prices less? Do you feel more secure about your future and the future of your children?" When that question is asked, and as it was by President Reagan, in such a powerful and deliberate way, that's a rough. How do you talk your way out of that one? I mean, you got to be Houdini and David Copperfield and Siegfried and Roy all combined to get your way out of that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I'm looking forward to watching it. I think it'll be a very highly watched debate. But what I tell people, though, is it's not for those of you that have made your mind up. That's the thing that both of these candidates need to remember. This debate is for the 8% or so that aren't sure what they're going to do yet.
I think you're right. I'm not sure I would go along with 8%. I think that it might be closer to 10.
Okay.
Which, of course, is not a major difference. Look, the reality is, in American politics today, that if the Democratic Party nominated Scooby-Doo, 40% of this nation, 45% of the nation would vote for Scooby-Doo for president. If the Republicans nominated, Mickey Mouse for president, about 45% would vote for Mickey Mouse. So that means that there's 10%, like you indicated, 10% in the middle. Now, those 10% are particularly hyper important in those 7 swing states. There are certain states which don't really count, except in the minds of the partisans, right? So we know that California will go one way, Florida will go another way. This one, it's the swing states. Now, in those 7 swing states, Donald Trump is doing better than Joe Biden. And you can look at polls. Some are more close, some are close, and some are less close. And these are, maybe this year, as goes Pennsylvania, so goes the nation. These 7 states that watch, those are the ones that have to watch, because the national polls really don't matter nearly as much as the state ones do. And there we are. We're going to have an interesting experience. But it's ultimately going to be defined by how does the viewer feel. If the viewer looks at Joe Biden and says, God, he's a nice guy. I liked him a lot, but man, the guy is too old. I know Uncle Frank has just turned 80, and man, I wouldn't let him drive down to the Dairy Queen. Come on. Then that's one thing. If, on the other hand, they look at Donald Trump and they say, I bet he could do some good things and help fix some of the problems, but I just am too damn exhausted by all this nonsense. I can't do it again. It's too damn much. I like it quiet. I don't want to hear all this nonsense day in, day out, day in, day out. Then they're likely to feel another way. So there we are. That's the best I got for you, Martha.
All right, Michael Levine, it is always great to talk to you, and love keeping up with your work. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, friend.
To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.